Mr Speaker, I agree with Mr Foss. I think members should say what they actually mean. That's a very good point, Mr Foss. And when the leader of the opposition, the then leader of the opposition, John Key, stands up in front of the television and says to New Zealanders, National will not raise GST, he should mean that. He should mean that. He said National will not raise GST, and they did. So I challenge Mr Foss to go and have a talk to Mr Key and give that exact same advice to Mr Key, that he should say what he means, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I do rise in support of this taxation, annual rates, Trans-Tasman savings, portability, Kiwisaver and Remedial Matters Bill 2009. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? And this is third reading. I also support the SOP put forward by Peter Dunn around major fixes to the GST regime about to be increased on the 1st of October. And I also support the SOP put forward by David Garrett. I never thought I'd say that, but put forward by David Garrett, adding to the rates available to be chosen by a worker in regards to Kiwisaver contributions. However, Mr Speaker, I would like to make 3 points in my speech on this bill. The first one is Labor did not support an increase in GST. The second point is this legislation is necessary and proper. And the third point is the absolute shambles the implementation of the GST increase has turned into. Mr Speaker, I do want to clarify one point in this House, and this comes down to my first point. Even though Mr Dunn's large SOP is about remedial action to the GST increase that will take place on October the 1st this year, we support it. We support his SOP because it is necessary in terms of getting this dreadful increase to a stage where it doesn't bring down the whole economy, even if it will bring down the government. One thing we did not support, one thing Labor did not support, is the increase in GST from 12.5% to 15%. Like the majority of New Zealanders, Labor has never agreed with an increase in GST, and we would never vote for a bill in this House that was so regressive, that so penalised the majority of good, hard-working New Zealanders, to give a tax cut where 33% went to only 5% of taxpayers. Mr Speaker, Labor supports robust legislation that helps New Zealanders prove business efficiency.
You're the government now, Chris.
Now, Mr Speaker, I've also introduced a supplementary order paper that will go just a little way in alleviating the financial stress imposed by the increase in GST. This SOP, Mr Speaker, would ensure that GST on rates be held at 12.5% for the remainder of the financial year.
Order.
This is
while I know the member wants to debate and mention an SOP, it was ruled out of order. And can I refer the member to a Speaker's Rulings 117.4, where you can't actually refer to something that has been decided in the committee that's been ruled out. I know the member proposed the bill, and I'm happy that he mentioned that, but one cannot use that as a substantive speech. So happy that you mention it, but we must talk about other things, about actually what the committee decided on, which now forms the third reading, which will become the Act. So I invite Stuart Nash to continue.
Mr Speaker, one thing that does disappoint me about this whole process is that the one SOP Labor put up, only one, we supported two, the one SOP we put up was actually turned down. Mr Speaker, that SOP would have alleviated in just a little way some of the harm felt by taxpayers who are going to really find it tough when GST increases on the 1st of October. We didn't ask for much, just one SOP which was voted down. And the thing that really surprises me about that is it was completely in line within the principles and the practices that the other SOPs were operating under. Mr Speaker, the major item in this bill allows for New Zealanders to return home from New Zealanders returning home from Australia to bring their retirement savings with them. Now, this is a sensible arrangement because we've been told there's potentially $16.6 billion in lost contributions from New Zealanders working in Australia that under this scheme could come back to New Zealand. Now, while this bill makes it easier for superannuitants to return home and bring their savings home, I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the government's complete lack of a plan for this country may in fact be a larger incentive to stay away. But, Mr. Speaker, they only have to wait for about another 18 months and then we'll welcome them home. There will be a plan. You'll see that very soon. But the portability arrangements will allow citizens who have retirement savings in both New Zealand and Australia to consolidate them in one account in their current country of residence. These amendments only cover the transfer of retirement savings between a Kiwisaver scheme and an Australian complying superannuation fund regulated by the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. A member must permanently immigrate to Australia and supply proof of their immigration to the provider. To protect the value of savings, transfers of savings between New Zealand and Australia will be exempt from any entry or exit taxes. And Mr. Speaker, the current inability of individuals to streamline and consolidate their personal retirement savings account is a real problem we understand to New Zealand or to cross-Tasman labour markets. The current costs undermine the effectiveness of policies aimed at improving retirement standards of living. And under the status quo, an individual may transfer the Kiwisaver savings to Australia on permanent immigration, but Australian compliant superannuation funds may not be transferred to New Zealand. So as mentioned, this may well potentially unlock $16.6 billion worth of savings, but even if it's a fraction of that, it will certainly be worth doing. Now, Mr. Speaker, my second point relates to Peter Dunn's SOP. This is proof that the whole GST increase is an absolute shambles. Ernst & Young, a major accountancy firm, stated in a press release, and I quote, "As we face the harsh reality of the 1st of October GST increase to 15%, many are realising this is not a modest increase and the issues are actually more complex than anyone first imagined." End of quote. This is a call of frustration, not from the Labour Party, but a major accountancy company involved in interpreting tax legislation. It is a shambles. And I wonder aloud how many more Remedial matters bills and SOPs we're going to see before this House, before this whole mess is tidied up. I am picking many. Mr. Dunn, all I can say is why wasn't this shambles tidied up before this bill even came to the House? If he'd consulted before the GST legislation came to this House, if he'd gone out, if he'd talked to the business community and asked if they had any problems, if he'd talked to the community, if he'd consulted, then this mess would not be in front of us now. In fact, if he had consulted, GST wouldn't be going up at all. This is why I introduced my SOP, asking for the Minister to consider Kiwi families before this GST increase is implemented. The Revenue Minister is in charge of this shambles. He also set up the Families Commission, Mr. Speaker, so I wonder what sort of families he believes the increase in GST are benefiting. Perhaps those families earning over $150,000 or over $1 million. Those families are about to get a nice little earner with this tax cut. However, they are not the norm. In Napier, Mr. Speaker, the median wage is only $30,000. And these people are about to get around $3 a week extra. The GST increase is going to ensure that the struggle gets worse for these families. Their budgets will be stretched and their feelings of disenfranchisement increased. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a mixture of good and the necessary. The good, for example, is the Trans-Tasman portability legislation. The necessary is required to tidy up the mess that is the GST increase. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I've outlined why the Labour Party is supporting this bill and why this bill is important. And our support is in no way an endorsement of the increase in GST at all. We did not support this. We do not support an increase in GST. And we were astonished and quite frankly disgusted when the Prime Minister introduced GST legislation